All right, welcome everybody. Excited to be joined today by Brad Howell, the CEO of Fidelity House CRC. Brad, thanks so much for joining the discussion today.
Oh, sure, Eric. Thanks for having me.
So much is happening in human service agencies. Maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of state of the union. What's going on today with human service agencies like Fidelity House CRC.
Well, I'll do a bit of a disclaimer. You did say today, because tomorrow it could be very different.
Very true.
So I think that gives you some indication of the state of the state. Things are so very much in motion from day to day. Obviously, the pandemic that we're entering a different phase with after 3 months, it has driven a lot of disruption to our system, to our sector, as it has across every sector. But since we support many folks with very vulnerable conditions, medical, physical conditions, and we have, for Fidelity CRC, we have 26 group homes. So we have congregate living, if you will, where been hit particularly hard in those settings with the pandemic. And so our focus over the past 3 months has been literally how to keep people healthy and alive. So we're coming from a very fundamental, a very basic standpoint, and had to retool all of our other services that were facility-based, that were conducted in people's homes, our family support services, to virtually everything going remote, where it can.
Yeah, what did that lift look like? I mean, that's not no small lift.
It wasn't, but I know for Fidelity House CRC and also for many other agencies, because we communicate now more than we ever did, that the lift was a lot, but it was remarkable how quickly we were able to implement very effective remote services to people in our day services, and offering support networks to our families and providers in the shared living arena and our adult foster care, which is both are very similar programs. So those families and providers that typically are fairly isolated, and just generally speaking, because they're in their own homes, they're not part of a day program or a congregate site, being able to use Zoom and other virtual meeting platforms have actually, taught us that these things have always been available to us, and so we just needed to access them. And so it actually provides a whole nother modality for people to connect. It unfortunately took this crisis for us to, ramp it up. And so what it looks like is that curriculum has been developed for running day services groups, and which by and large is probably the easier part. The hard part has been making sure that the end user had the technology and the capability to engage in, African drumming group on Zoom, which is one of the groups we have, or, and to augment what we were doing virtually with dropping off activity kits where the person lives. So they actually had a couple different modalities to connect with, both the visual and auditory, and then the tactile with the actual materials that might be needed for any particular group. So it's ever evolving, for sure. And we know that it's here to stay, at least as a service line or a percentage of our services being delivered.
Yeah, how do you look at the entire market of what's going on in all of human services, and where that's at today? Because that's a pretty big landscape, and I think there's a lot of change happening there. What are some of the changes other than like shifting to virtual that you guys might be seeing or some of the things that you're preparing for, either that you have prepared for in May or kind of gearing up for in June?
Yeah, I was on a very recent meeting, as usual, discussing the short-term and long-term future of our day services in general. And certainly some of that is going to be driven by what the payer and the families and the customers want. And that is all being figured out now, and that will certainly influence what we can and can't do. However, where I see it going is that we were already moving towards more community-based services, less facility-based. Mm-hmm. And just as we transition from the old model of sheltered employment, where people would work in our facilities and we would bring contract work in, piecework, packaging, labeling, and we've completely transformed that model where none of those workshops exist anymore, and any employment opportunities are out in businesses in the community. That was a 3+ year process. So what we have now, because of the pandemic, is a quick breaking of the proverbial paradigm into something that has not yet reformed into the new paradigm. And that is being figured out now. But what we found is that there's some people who are more willing to engage in activities remotely because there's more personal space. There's less distraction in a room where you're physically present with a bunch of other folks. There's the ability to control the volume. There's ability to some extent control the size of the image. We're all Zoom experts now, right? Yeah. And where you actually have the activity. You could be in your living room, your dining room, your bedroom, you're outside. So for some people, let's say on the autism spectrum, there may be great benefits to quality of engagement. The one thing, at least one thing, few things we have to guard against is, one, we're already working with a population who, by and large, is at risk for isolation and not integrated into their community. And so all of our programs are geared to help get people more integrated into their communities. And so, as we have all experienced with staying at home, it's isolating. And our portal to the world is what we're doing right now. So that's a downside, a potential downside here. And I think the other potential downside is, what choice do people have? If I'm a consumer of these services and this Zoom modality or FaceTime or whatever it might be is how I receive my services, well, if I don't have the technology equipment, a laptop or smartphone or some other tablet of some kind, or have the capacity to engage in that way and need hand-over-hand instruction or cueing, then this is not going to work very well for me.
Right.
And there is definitely a significant part of our population who fall into that category. So how do we create services that perhaps is a hybrid, that we can reach out remotely and do some things, maybe a wellness type checks, but that physical interaction or at least proximity is still vital. And layer on top of that, where somebody lives is also very critical. If you're living at home right now with your family members, but your family members need to go back to work, then we have a support issue. And if you're unable to return to the facility, then that has a pretty broad impact on not only the consumer, but the family.
Mm-hmm. And so, with all this change and disruption that's going on, and a little bit of the transformation of your business model as a whole, right? Where do you see opportunities going forward? Because, when anything catastrophic happens, there's always something that is a bright, is a bright spot that comes out of that. So, where are the opportunities going forward? What does the future look like?
Yeah, well, as I gaze into the crystal ball, the future is definitely moving quickly towards the remote services, and so what's exciting about that is number one, the geographic boundaries are erased.
Yeah.
And so we could easily be serving somebody in California as in Methuen, right next door. So that is an exciting possibility. We could reach people who may be isolated because of where they live and don't have access to the same kind of services that we do here in Massachusetts or in the Merrimack Valley. Obviously some of that's going to be driven by who the payer is of services. But something else that we could, another interesting intersection is with the educational community. So obviously colleges and universities have been offering remote learning for a long time. This is new for us. There could be some unique opportunities to collaborate with community colleges and universities to offer some interesting programming to people we serve or people who may struggle with college level courses, but we may have some capacity to help with. So I think that's pretty interesting. I think the other thing that is already in motion even before the pandemic was, and it's probably one of the questions you're going to ask as a follow-up anyways, is consolidation of the provider system. There is, by every account you can probably point to, any data point, there's going to be less money in the system,
right?
Because the state is at a significant deficit for next fiscal year. So that's something that we have to be aware of. And how do I, as the head of the agency, help position the organization both to mitigate risk around that, but also to look at where the opportunities may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you had just gone through a merger last year. Fidelity House and CRC came together and merged last year. So you see more of that coming. Are there a significant amount? Is it the pressure? Is it the market pressure driving that? Like, what are some of the driving forces that you see that are really, other than COVID having rapidly accelerated everything? What are some of those major driving pressures?
Yeah, and I think the way you phrased it is exactly right. COVID accelerated what had already been in motion and brought to the fore, I think the vulnerability and the fragility of our system, that there was already a slowing of growth in our sector. And I think so driving force was one, what was already in motion, and the state needing to look at the trajectory of mass health spending, Medicaid spending in the state, hence the mass health reform that started 3+ years ago, that by all accounts is somewhat stalled. So I think a driving force is the cost of our services and the state's ability to continue to manage the trajectory of those costs is just going up and up. as the population ages, as more folks are getting diagnosed with autism, you put all of those things together, and it's probably not a sustainable model the way it's built. So that's a driving force, and unfortunately, you know, the first thing that does pop to mind is money. But the other thing that is influencing this is that provider community and families and individuals with disabilities have been advocating for choice as to what a person receives and from who and what does it look like. And so as younger folks transition into our system from typically the special education system, families are more astute, more vocal, and potentially more effective advocates for their family member. And so we are needing to respond to customer choice that is not just the payer. And I think that's in the system as well, maybe not as dramatically or as quickly as the funding does.
What does that mean, though, to have the choice on the families and individual side?
Well, so what typically happens if your family member is in a special education situation and is by age 22 in Massachusetts, whether you've graduated or not, you will be leaving the special education system. That's just the way it is written.
Sure.
So prior to that, prior to age 22, many families literally are visiting different agencies for day services, for residential services, typically day services. And we'll go to my agency and check us out, take a tour, talk to the staff, see how it's operating. Go to another nearby agency and another nearby agency and, you know, see what they like the best and then select one. So there's been more of that over the past several years than there ever was before that. So that's choice. So people could choose what day program to go to. There are some avenues of funding that's much more flexible, so more of an a la carte. So I could select to hire my cousin Joe to be a support person, and I could hire Fidelity House CRC to provide employment services.
Sure.
So you could put it together. That's a smaller percentage of people. So choice would be, where do I want to receive the services, from whom, what does it look like?
So that seems, with the shifting in business model, seems awfully complex. And everything is also, technology's got to be a major factor. How do you see that playing into human services, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, that's definitely another driving force. To kind of follow up on your previous question, other driving forces are agencies like mine, our ability to have the infrastructure to continue to evolve, if you will. Technology is certainly much more of a factor and not just a luxury, but a necessity. Right. And it's only going to become more so. So to implement electronic healthcare records across our organization is a huge expense and a need for specific kind of talent to ensure that system is implemented and maintained. At least as of today, being a $27 million agency, that is a hard infrastructure to afford.
Right.
So another reason for consolidation is to gain capacity, to enhance the infrastructure, not just around supporting technology, but attracting talent, being able to afford salaries for people you need to get in that expert, the CIO, a higher level of talent that you may need. The other thing that I see happening is that our our involvement, we have many people that we serve in our residential program that are high medical needs.
Okay.
We have a number of nurses on staff. Probably, I would guess, more than your average organization that does what we do, simply because of who we're serving, just how it evolved, what we became known for, being able to support folks with more medical issues. We are delivering healthcare services, but not in the traditional sense.
Okay.
Not you go to your doctor's office, or you go to the clinic, or you go to the ER, but on a daily basis, we are managing healthcare needs that are fairly significant. Feeding tubes, tracheotomies, repositioning people in wheelchairs, people who are, very involved. So that intersection between what we do in the healthcare industry, I see happening more and more. So where that ends up, is not quite clear, but our overlap brings us closer together, those two industries. And you could say the same thing for mental health. We don't have a specific mental health clinic or a substance abuse clinic, but we also provide behavioral health services as part of our other services, not as a standalone. So what I see happening is, kind of your one-stop shopping, where your provider agencies are going to need the capacity to provide an array of services, because that individual is needing all those ancillary services. So instead of going to 15 different places, they're just coming to you.
Yeah, so that's a lot. I mean, so what you're saying is consolidation or just looking at that kind of continuum of care and identifying where you're strong or where there's other organizations that might be tangential to that process, or to kind of those individuals that you're serving and their needs.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. And I think, by and large, our sector has been somewhat, isolated or not part of the whole consolidation scene. When you look at other industries, consolidation's happening all the time, mergers and acquisitions. And I think it's now at our front door, not just at our front door. I went through the door. We merged, as you said, a year and a half ago, for that very reason, to gain capacity, to have a broader diversification of funding, and to be more adaptable and capable of dealing with a lot of unknowns that we're seeing play out.
So there's a lot of agencies that are kind of like a varying size that may be considering consolidation as an option. How do leaders even start a process, or consider another organization? Like, what do they, what do they do?
Well, sometimes we call you, Eric. And we say, hey, Eric, here's what we're thinking. But what we do is you look at, you can look at it different ways. You can look at it geographically. You can look at it service lines, what's compatible. You look at who you have a relationship with. Because like any business, a lot of things come down to relationships. And can you start that discussion? You look at their financial status, and you look at, is this an organization that's on sound footing?
Yep.
Because most of us,
especially this day and age,
and most of us don't have the capacity to take on somebody else's significant debt.
Yep.
So you need to look at a lot of those different things, and are they complementary services? The merger we did, Career Resources and Fidelity House, brought together a full spectrum of services. One agency, Career Resources, did not have family support services. And Fidelity House did not have day services. Those were kind of two of the big missing links each organization had. And coming together, we pretty much offer just about every service for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and acquired brain injuries that's out there. So it gives us more diversification. We can serve a person through their whole lifespan, literally. So you look at that, and there's other factors. In our situation, one of the CEO was retiring.
Yeah.
So that can be an obstacle if you're trying to figure out who's going to be the remaining organization, CEO and board, and many of those things. So there may be other opportunities that might, could be available if there's somebody in transition.
Okay. So simple as just paying attention and being involved, and then massively complex once you meet a partner, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think your point, being involved, is for me something that is essential as a leader. And being involved, to further define that, is, what does that mean? It means knowing what's happening in your sector, knowing what's happening in the greater community, knowing what's happening at the state funding level, the legislative level, and the federal level, because they all come together and influence. And I have spent a fair amount of my time over the years making sure I am plugged into the right places, so that I have the information and have developed the relationships over time, and developing trust.
Yep.
Many of these discussions will break down because there's a lack of trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
We won't even get started.
Yep.
Won't even get started.
So that's I think trust is the foundation of any good culture as we go forward. And you also had mentioned, being a leader in today's world is a lot different. And I'm wondering, what's one of the big lessons that you've taken away, personally as a CEO in the big seat, over the past 3 months, where, I've seen a lot of CEOs rise to the occasion, as many have across the country. What's one big learning lesson that you've had out of this whole thing?
A big lesson has been truly understanding the impermanence and the vulnerability of the services and the people that we support. So,
like the fragile nature of the system, or the people's needs?
Really both.
Yeah.
Really both. I think I've always been aware of the people that we serve and the challenges they face and their vulnerability. But as an organization who's been around for 40 plus years, how things can change very quickly,
mm-hmm.
and how important adaptability is, and humility, because none of us have all the answers. And during this upheaval, absolutely nobody had any answers, or certainly all of them. And so collectively, it was important for colleagues to come together and share, what are you doing? And many of us do that anyways on a regular basis,
sure.
But others, you're sharing not because you want to get a market advantage or figure out how to best, do so. You're figuring out how to keep people alive. And the humility is asking somebody, how are you doing this? And risking that, from your own personal ego standpoint, risking like, what do you mean you don't know where to get masks?
Yep.
Or something very basic. And so I think there's that humility that has come with this to say, wow, we don't know what the future is going to hold. Those of us sitting in this chair who typically are the ones that have the answers or have the knowledge or the insight to plan strategically or to give guidance. And now we are in a seat where you have to draw upon not technical knowledge necessarily, but fortitude, something that comes from within, not necessarily, your experience in handling when there was a 10% cut 5 years ago.
Right.
Now you're coming from your intuitive place and your willingness to support and be supported.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the level of collaboration that's happened. And like you said, I think humility is a good word because, everyone dropped their guard and just started talking with each other about, the honest realities of their situation. And, to the benefit of all the CEOs I've interviewed, everybody stepped up and just helped each other. It was just, it's been wonderful to watch either, through some of the interview discussions or just behind the scenes with clients. It was, I think that was one of the key words that stood out probably mostly of all the interviews was that word connect and staying connected, to know that you kind of weren't alone in this whole thing.
Yeah. And I that has been very uplifting.
Yeah.
Throughout all of this, as you're saying, is there opportunities or anything positive that comes out of this? I mean, many of us meaning leaders of other organizations in the state, have had the opportunity to connect either through ADDP or other kind of professional organizations and have developed relationships over the years. And certainly in the Merrimack Valley in this area, there's a very strong connection. And so that also helped when this hit, that it was easy to pick up the phone, but everybody was doing that. And I do hope and I do think it will continue well beyond the pandemic, at least to a larger extent than it was before.
Yeah. That I think is a really great high note to kind of end the discussion on, because it's just it's been such a bright spot in this whole fog. And so, Brad, I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to have this discussion and learn a little bit about what you guys are doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
So for anyone that wants to learn more about Brad and what's going on at Fidelity House CRC, you can click the link below. As always, we hope you subscribe so you can hear more discussions with great leaders like Brad. Thank you.